Great. Okay, I think we're going to get started. This is Rebecca Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Vivli, and really wanted to welcome you here today to our webinar. I just want to let everyone know after the presentation, we'll be sending a link to the recording and slides. Please post your questions via the chat window and we'll respond to the questions. We'll have some time after the webinar, and all of you will be muted during the course of this webinar. So today I'm really delighted to present our presenters from 3 different platforms. From COVID CP will be Betsy Ogborn and Barbara Beerer. From the Transcelerate team, we have Cara Rinaldi and Janice Chang, and we also have Jules Desmond from Amgen, and I'll be presenting from the Vivli side. In terms of our agenda, we'll have a number of points of discussion. So in terms of, what we'll be looking at today, I'm really delighted to be part of this trifecta of partner platforms operating in an ecosystem that are working towards a common mission towards addressing our current global pandemic in some way. And as we continue to coordinate efforts together, there are some meaningful differences in how we're conducting our mission on creating these trusted environments to enable alliances and data sharing. And you'll hear about this today and how each organization fits in the COVID-19 data ecosystem. You'll hear individually our thoughts on how we're accelerating collaboration and data sharing related to COVID-19, some key features of each approach, and the various constituencies each initiative is primarily designed to support. And of course, we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So please save your questions or feel free as we go through to put your questions in the chat so you don't lose track of those. And we'll make sure to take time at the end to answer your questions. So today you'll hear from 3 different platforms. First up will be COVID CP, or COVID-19 collaboration platform, primarily pointed to trialists who wish to align and share protocols and data related to COVID-19 research. Next up will be Transcelerate, talking about the Datacelerate platform for qualifying biotech and biomedical research agencies pursuing COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. And then ending up with Vivli for qualified researchers who wish to share or access data related to COVID-19 as well as other areas. So I think that'll be a fairly well-rounded presentations, and then again we'll follow up with Q&A from all of us. So next I'd like to hand it over to Betsy, and I believe Barbara, who's also on as well. So Betsy.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks for organizing. Thanks for giving me time to talk about the COVID collaboration platform, or COVID CP. I'm Betsy Ogborn. I'm an associate professor of biostatistics at Johns Hopkins, and along with Barbara Beerer and Dan Sharfstein and many other supporters who are listed on our website, I've been working on the COVID collaboration platform for the past few months. So first, I will tell you a little bit about the motivation for this platform. Next slide, please. Trials for finding effective treatments and prevention strategies for COVID-19 are proliferating across the globe at an unprecedented rate. So this is actually out of date now. This is probably a week old, and the number of trials is increasing, by 100 or more every week. So as of a couple weeks ago, we had over 1,500 trials registered across the world. The plurality of these are small, underpowered trials that are not in coordination with other trials that are designed to answer similar questions. Next slide, please. And this is really counter to best practices, in particular as recommended by the National Academy of Sciences following the 2014 and 2015 Ebola outbreak, where they argued for the need to build infrastructure to coordinate international research efforts and to facilitate data sharing and coordination in clinical trials. Next slide, please. It's also counter to a lot of the recommendations that have been coming out in top medical and research journals and also in the public media. So I'm highlighting this particular article because a lot of the authors are on our advisory board, and because this pull quote really summarizes our main mission, which is, in the context of public health emergencies, study teams should be encouraged to collaborate on existing ongoing protocols rather than starting new independent trials. Next slide. And this is just a small subset of the headlines and titles for similar stories that have come out in editorial pages and news outlets. Next slide. The issue is that in the absence of coordination to kind of organize the trial landscape, local outbreaks can attenuate before a single institution or a single region trial is able to fully enroll. We saw this first in China, now we're seeing it at many East Coast institutions in the US. Lots of small and sometimes single-arm trials will never be able to provide reliable data on their own, even if they are able to completely enroll, but they could really meaningfully contribute to a body of data. And then there's a real risk not only of false negatives, but also of false positives when there's a proliferation of underpowered studies or a proliferation of studies that are designed to answer similar questions all at the same time. Underpowered studies have a higher probability of false positives. And when many studies are assessing similar interventions simultaneously, we essentially have a multiple testing problem with an increased risk of type 1 errors or false positives when you look across the collection of studies. We are very much not the only ones working on these problems. We're just one group among many trying to coordinate disparate data sources and aggregate evidence for COVID-19. But what sets COVID-CP apart are two things. First, our focus on clinical trials and randomized clinical trials. And second, our focus on building collaborations along the way rather than aggregating data after the fact. Next slide. So against that backdrop, COVID-CP is a platform with the end goal of aggregating evidence across disparate COVID-19 trials in order to get good clinical data faster and more reliably. It's a repository of trial protocols that are available for collaboration at various stages and depths. So we will accept protocols that are open to joining forces with other research teams to create a kind of ground up core protocol that can be used at multiple sites in independent studies of similar interventions. Trials might enroll new subjects from a different site or actually form a multi-site trial if they find each other early enough in the process. And then the real clincher is sharing data for the purposes of aggregated analyses. We're interested in sharing all kinds of resources and making the trial process more efficient, but really the most important outcome is that trials are able to share data and aggregate evidence across disparate trials. Next slide. We hope that the availability and uptake of a platform like this can solve several of the issues that I pointed to. So if protocols are public and available for collaboration, then data can be collected by different teams in different geographic areas as the epidemic travels. If we can aggregate evidence across multiple sites, we can get answers about what treatment and prevention strategies work much faster and much more reliably than if we analyze subsets of data in isolation. And bringing disparate trials interested in the same question together for coordinated analysis avoids the problems of false positives that I mentioned. Next slide. So this is a screenshot showing the kind of guidelines for how a PI can use our site to share their protocol and reach out to find collaborators. Next slide. We integrate with Clinicaltrials.gov, so any PI that is already registered to Clinicaltrials.gov doesn't have to duplicate their effort, although we do hope to capture many trials earlier in the process than Clinicaltrials.gov would. I think the ideal workflow would be that that researchers start to use this platform when they're early in the planning process so that they don't have to duplicate the effort of creating a protocol if one already exists for a similar trial. Next slide. So just to describe in a little bit more detail, PIs can submit a draft or a completed protocol to the website, and if they receive requests to collaborate through the website, they can choose to accept them. We do minimal vetting on these requests just to make sure that they have legitimate research value and that we're not spamming PIs. Researchers can also click on the request to collaborate button for a particular protocol that's already on our platform and request to collaborate. And a collaboration can mean any number of things. We want to be really flexible about what counts as collaboration so that we can encourage maximal collaboration, but we also want to support more limited collaborations if there are limitations on the particular trials. So collaboration could mean working together on a draft protocol to create a mutually agreeable core protocol. A collaboration request could be a request to join a study as a new site or to enroll subjects under the original PI. And it can also mean, and we really hope it will mean, sharing data for aggregated analyses to pool evidence across all sites for a similar research question. We will offer guidelines to ensure that everybody involved in a collaboration receives due credit and that any researchers using our website will be credited for the work that they post there. We have lots of biostatisticians like me volunteering their time to perform or design data analyses to aggregate evidence across trials, and we're partnering with Vivli for data storage and data anonymization, and also with the Trial Innovation Network and Smart IRB, who have offered to provide free support for collaborations formed through COVID-CP. Next slide. Currently, we are actively working on planning aggregated analyses for 3 broad treatment areas: hydroxychloroquine, adult convalescent plasma use, and pediatric convalescent plasma use. And we're working, these 3 areas are in different stages of the process, but for some of them, we're working with PIs that are getting trials off the ground in a kind of staggered fashion, and we're working with them to harmonize their protocols as they go forward. For others, for hydroxychloroquine, for example, the trials have all either de facto or officially stopped enrollment, and there we're working on harmonizing the data post hoc and designing analyses and understanding the most efficient and most feasible process for bringing disparate trials together. We're exploring ways to lower barriers to entry and trying to understand what those barriers are. And going forward, we will model our work with future groups of PIs based on the successes and failures that we're learning with these test cases. Next slide. And with that, thank you all very much. And I look forward to hearing your questions, and please reach out by email or through the COVID-CP website if you have any questions after the fact or feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Betsy. I know you and Barbara have done a lot of work to move this forward, and thank you for your presentation. Next up is the Transcelerate team. So I want to introduce Cara Rinaldi and Janice Chang.
Great, thanks so much, Rebecca. We really look forward to providing some details on our work in Transcelerate that's supporting COVID-19 data sharing. I'm going to take a few minutes first to provide a brief overview of Transcelerate, and then I'll pass it over to Jules Desmond, who's leading our work in the COVID-19 data sharing, to take you through the specifics of what we're doing. So Transcelerate is a not-for-profit organization that was founded in 2012. Our mission is to support and improve the health of people around the world, and we accomplish this through focusing on simplifying and driving efficiencies in the research and development process. And we do this through a collaborative model where we cultivate collaboration both internally and externally. Next slide, please. Our membership base is biopharmaceutical research and development organizations. Transcelerate itself has just 23 employees, but today, as you see on the screen, there are 20 members, and it's the talented individuals across our members that come to us to drive and deliver our solutions. There are thousands of people that contribute both their time and their expertise to Transcelerate. As a single stakeholder organization, we really do understand the value of collaboration, and it is critical for us to partner and engage across key stakeholders. And that's really to ensure that the solutions that we deliver meet their needs and actually deliver the intended impact to the entire ecosystem. Next slide. Just to call out that we are not a US organization, our members are global, and the solutions that we develop address problems that people face around the world and around the globe. Our member company experts from 30 countries come together to form what we call our country network. And the country network is there to really raise awareness of Transcelerate and to partner across the regions, not only to drive solution delivery, but to also share best practices to facilitate implementation of our solutions. And as you can see, as we've grown in our partnerships and engagement with health authorities, we continue to evolve those relationships. We engage with 14 health authorities, and our interactions really range from engaging with regulators to talk through specific feedback on initiatives, providing them with annual updates on our entire portfolio, and in some instances, being a convener where we can bring regulators together. Next slide. So this is a really high-level look at our portfolio. Our portfolio at Transcelerate today consists of 32 initiatives, and we've got greater than 70 solutions that are available. Our initiatives and solutions are really aligned to our strategic priorities, and there are 3 primary strategic priorities for Transcelerate. The first is around improving the patient and the site experience in research and development. The second is around enhancing sponsor efficiencies and drug safety. And the last one is around greater information sharing and harmonization of process. Data sharing is obviously inherent in our strategic priorities and very critical to the advancement of research and development, and has been a significant focus for us in the recent years. We've developed Transcelerate, and Transcelerate is a platform that actually facilitates the sharing of both clinical trial data and preclinical data amongst our members. I'm going to hand over to Jules, who's going to take the deeper dive into Transcelerate and how we've pivoted to support data sharing in COVID-19.
Thanks, Cara. So yeah, we've been facilitating sharing of trial data among our members for over 5 years now. And we're going to get into a bit of how we've expanded these efforts to non-members in response to COVID-19. So you can go to the next slide. And this slide gives an overview of how we facilitate sharing of data. So I'll speak to these mechanics for a couple of minutes. And from left to right, any entity that signs our data sharing agreement follows this same process. The studies enter our database either through a blinded request from another participant or through proactive sharing. Either way, the process after that trigger is the same. And the entity itself is responsible for preparing the data for upload. That includes either pseudonymization or anonymization steps. And once prepped, they will upload the data sets to Transcelerate, which Kara mentioned is our platform. It's secure, 21 CFR Part 11 compliant environment, and it's built on the Accenture Insights platform. In terms of access to studies in the database, any participating entity is free to go in and download particular studies or the entire database at any time on demand without the need for a research proposal. All the vetting is done at the time of joining, and this is a reason why we control who's able to participate in our initiative. And for participants, the obvious benefit here is speed and freedom. And then in the last box, in another nod to this essentially being a solution that's designed to specifically meet the needs of biopharma, Transcelerate was intentionally designed to not have an analytics platform on it. It's because our intended end users are much more interested in performing their own unconstrained detailed analyses in private on their own systems, essentially querying it as they would their own trial data. And this download also allows us as end consumers to integrate external historical trial data into our own trial data to get deeper insights. So next slide. When the pandemic hit, what this history enabled us to do was pivot very quickly and leverage the systems, experience, and trust we already had in place to adapt and meet the specific subject level data sharing needs of the clinical development biopharma community for COVID-19. And over the past few months, we've essentially adapted in three key areas. One, we've already talked about, is the expansion of participation beyond Transcelerate members for the COVID-19 specific environment to other biopharma and government research agencies that are engaged in COVID-19 studies. We've also enabled sharing of complete clinical trials. Our regular trial sharing solution is limited to control arms, but for COVID-19, we can share investigational product arm data also. And then thirdly, we've enabled speed. We don't have to wait until the end of a study. As long as the data is clean, post a database lock, then it can be shared. So we're hearing from a number of sharing solutions today, and I think it's worth pausing on this bottom set of bullets to just understand where we see our place in the ecosystem, as Rebecca framed it at the start, and what we're trying to solve for. So hopefully make it a little clearer as to why we have sort of a limitation of participation. One of our key elements is that we've created what we refer to as a trusted walled garden for sharing. It's not public. And because we limit participation based on organization type and data security and privacy expectations, we are able to ensure that data is always high quality. We're able to allow for full dataset downloads without research proposals, and do all this while maintaining high utility. And by high data utility, I mean that because this sharing circle is trusted, contributors feel able to apply less conservative data minimization for privacy when preparing data for sharing. So the data is obviously still de-identified, but we've tried to make an environment where, for example, rare AEs are more likely to be maintained in the data set rather than redacted because of the trust and data security system of our end users. And then finally, we're also able to maintain this uniform database because everything comes in using industry standard data models that are readily interpretable and, importantly, allow data from different studies to be easily integrated with one another. As Betsy emphasized in her talk, this ability to aggregate is so hugely important to generate rapid insights during this pandemic. You can go to the next slide. And this slide details what we share through Transcelerate. So the hexagons give examples of elements shared. In reality, there are many more variables for a study that get shared. The intent here is for the entire raw data set to be shared, minus the elements that need to be redacted during anonymization or pseudonymization. It's important to point out that these aren't analysis-ready data sets. These are the variables as collected on case report forms, essentially, and if a study's endpoints were derived, then those derivations would not be in these data sets. So the end user must be able to interpret this industry standard data model, and another reason why we have a very specific set of end users in mind. And then at the bottom here, to enable that interpretation, we do require supporting documents also be shared and be available to participants. Those include the study protocol. This can be redacted, and a copy of the case report form, and also a couple of other documents that describe the data model. You can go to the next slide, which here we highlight some of the key features of the first version of our COVID-19 module on Transcelerate. Again, we have no analytics on the platform, but the platform allows for full download of both the structured data and then the unstructured supporting documents. We have a blinded study request process if that's needed. We have mainly proactive sharing of COVID-19 studies, but requesting remains available. And we have full audit and version control along with quality control upon submission. And for users, we have a great set of support material available. It's building on our 5 years of experience, and this really covers interaction with the system and also data preparation and use, and it's backed up by dedicated in-person support. So next slide, I think, is the summary slide, and at the bottom here is a link for anyone who wants to learn more. Go to this one. The slides are distributed, and hopefully this has given some clarity to our solution and its strengths, and we see our place in the ecosystem being one more focused on the needs of industry and complementary to other solutions on this core that are maybe more suited to other types of end user. So I'll stop there and hand back, Rebecca, to you, I think.
Thanks so much, Jules and Kara, for that very clear presentation. So I'll end with Vivli and introduce you to who we are. We're a nonprofit organization that offers convening for the industry, academia, nonprofit funders and foundations, as well as government funders and regulators. We offer harmonization around policy and try to move the culture of data sharing. We also oversee the implementation of a platform that is a secure, state-of-the-art data sharing and compute platform that serves the international community around trials from any disease, country, sponsor, funder, or an investigator. Next, please. So by the numbers today, we have over 5,000 trials that represent 3 million participants from over 100 countries. We have over 27 members and from a diverse number of contributors. The next slide really shows kind of the breadth of our membership. We have a number of pharmaceutical and biotech members, as shown here, academic institutions such as Hopkins, Harvard, UCSF, and Duke, as well as a number of foundations, as well as some NIH platforms that we also bridge to. So we don't just have those that contribute data to Vivli, but we also think of ourselves as bridging to other platforms, such as Project DataSphere and Critical Path Institute, for example. Next slide, please. So when we think about bridging, we offer a secure environment that bridges to multiple platforms. So how that works in reality is that a user can request data sets, and then we provision those into a secure research environment or secure sandbox, and that user can actually access that from their desktop, and then they can provision data from multiple sources once that request is approved according to transparent criteria. So data without analytics to access the power of that data is not that useful, right? So we actually have to provision in those data packages, those statistical packages as well. So we also offer Stata, Jupyter Notebook, Python, SAS, and other statistical analysis software for them. Users also include or can bring their own scripts, software, or data upon request, and they analyze that together in this secure environment. Next slide, please. We are really, as you can see, alongside our other partners, really committed to advancing the knowledge around COVID-19. We recently launched a COVID portal to enable the search and sharing of data simply through this portal, which makes it a little easier to search for data for COVID or to share trials specifically for COVID. And then our portal specifically offers this dedicated search function, the availability of a fast-track review and sharing for many of our partners. We've also, to lower the barriers, are waiving all fees to share, archive, access, and analyze COVID trials, and then a waiving of anonymization fees through our key partners, DWise and Privacy Analytics, as this has been a barrier for some of our investigators who are looking to share. Next. So in terms of the request process for COVID trials, a team comes in to request studies. Many of them go through an accelerated proposal check, and many of our partners are accelerating that through. So rather than the normal 30 days, some of them are accelerating that significantly. Then goes through a DUA or data use agreement execution. They can then access and conduct their analysis, and that drives through to publication. So that is kind of the streamlined process. So that really ends the formal presentation part. I just want to end with summarizing where we are with all three platforms. As you heard, COVID CP is primarily targeting towards trialists who wish to share protocols and data related to COVID. Transcelerate for the industry pursuing vaccines and treatments, and Vivli for qualified researchers who wish to share or access data related to COVID. So I see that there are questions bubbling in. I really want to thank our presenters for some very clear presentations. You know, there's what I realize now that there are a number of very diverse solutions that all addressing the pandemic in a different way. So I can really go to the questions now, and if you have others, certainly put them in. So one questions that come in, and this is for the Transcelerate team, is can Transcelerate share more about which academic and government studies are using Transcelerate? So that is for the Transcelerate team.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's Kara. I can take that. I think it's asking around who can access, in particular, the COVID-19 data sharing solution that we have. As Jules mentioned, right now it is open to obviously Transcelerate member companies, as well as other qualifying non-member biopharma companies and certain biomedical research agencies that can participate. There is non-member entity criteria that first must be met. All of the details around the individual criteria and how we vet applications that come through are available on our website. So I would encourage anybody that's interested, that's a biopharma company or a biomedical research agency, to go to the Transcelerate website, and you'll find further information on the application process and the specific criteria that you would need to meet in order to get access to the system.
Great, thank you. So I have another question for Transcelerate. how do you manage sharing permissions of patient level data? Do all contributors have to agree to sharing data for third parties?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So yeah, we have a common data sharing agreement that all participants have to sign before they're able to either share or get data from our system, and that covers all the various privacy concerns and patient level privacy concerns.
Oh, great. Okay. And then there's one coming in for Vivli, is whether the Vivli portal has been launched. The answer is yes. We recently just launched the Vivli portal, and there has been data that's been starting to filter in. So thank you very much for that question. I do have a question for the COVID CP folks. It's clear to me that why PIs should collaborate and go work on a common portal, but protocol, but why would they be incentivized to do so? So that was my one question. My second follow-up question is, since this is such a natural thing to do, has this ever been done for other diseases? And if so, has it been successful?
Yeah, those are great questions. The incentive system is really built against this kind of collaboration, and I think that's one of the most important things that we need to change before the next global public health emergency in order to pave the way for a more collaborative research environment. I think a lot of researchers are incentivized by wanting to get the best data and information into the hands of policymakers and clinicians, and are willing to sacrifice some academic credit for that. I also think in some cases we're seeing, so with hydroxychloroquine as an interesting test case, because in this case, we started working with the PIs just before the recovery trial announced, released a press release with pretty definitive results that there's no efficacy signal for hydroxychloroquine. And so that really changes the incentives. Now many of these trials would not be able to publish on their own. And for your second question, I don't know. I'm not aware of any. I wonder if Barbara is, but I'm not aware of large scale efforts that have been successful like along these lines.
I also have not, I'm not aware of any. There are other platforms, obviously, that are making data available for other conditions. Warm is one of them for other viral conditions, but it's got a different model than this one. That's all at the end of trial, similar to what Vivli had been doing prior to this pandemic.
Thank you. Okay, and here's another question from for Transcelerate. It's great Transcelerate has moved beyond sharing of control group data. How do you vet members? Can any academic researcher become a member?
Yep, this is Kara. I can respond, and some of that I think links to a previous question around how we vet applicants. So we do have a process to do that internally, and we do make it clear on what the requirements are to be able to get access. At this time, again, it is open to biopharma companies and biomedical research agencies. And not to individual academic institutions. And I think that's one of the things around presenting here in this trifecta, as you call it, Rebecca, around what Vivli offers and what Transcelerate offers, and how Jules has talked about the on-demand access to the data that's in there and being able to utilize your existing analytics platform. For academic researchers, the research proposal and the analytics platform that Vivli offers is better probably suited for those academic researchers than Transcelerate, Datacelerate. Jules, I don't know if you have more to add to the differences between the two.
I think that summarizes it really nicely.
Great. Okay. So I think this is a question for COVID CP that says, I have a question for COVID. Could you comment on whether there are active efforts to reach more potential collaborators? How have collaborators found out about COVID CP and the resources it offers?
So most of our outreach has been through research administration at the institution level. We've reached out to IRBs, to institutional prioritization committees, to the heads of clinical research and CTSA and Trial Innovation Network leaders at institutions, and then asked them to contact and advertise to the PIs at their institutions. We've also done a little bit of direct outreach to PIs, emailing PIs that we find through clinicaltrials.gov, but outreach has been a real challenge. I think we're very open to any suggestions about the best way to get the word out, and then once the word is out, to incentivize participation.
And we had a small letter in Science, which was trying to sort of get the word out. But most of the outreach has been US centric, so it would be great to hear from others as to other dissemination tools or approaches. I would love to hear from you.
Great. So here's a question. In addition to the formal legal agreements that need to be signed to use various platforms, what are the fees? Good question. And I guess I'll jump into the deep end for that one first, and then I'll let any others that wish to answer that. Well, for us, I mean, we're waiving our fees for COVID, and then for those that wish to share, our fees are on are published on our website, and I think that's fairly clear. Anyone else would like to jump in there, or
and
about,
COVID CP
any fees?
COVID CP is
Sure.
free,
Barbara?
and at least COVID CP is free, and at least until we're overwhelmed with data, which isn't happening, the statistical assistance is also free, in part supported by NCATS and the CTSA program, but in part because, you know, the community at large feels it's their academic and personal commitment to help where they can.
Great. Okay.
And for Datacelerate, if you're a qualifying member, there's no charge either.
Great. There is a question that came in that says there are institutions such as Oxford, and I'm sure there are others, which hold a large amount of patient-level data for COVID patients and would be sharing that data. How is your platform different from this? I'm happy to take a crack at that, but would others like to do it? Okay. So our answer would be that our data is from diverse sources. So we have data from pharmaceutical companies and other sources like academics and foundations. So Oxford is likely sharing data from Oxford University. So I think which is wonderful, and if they're sharing that data from externally. So I think that is probably the difference is the data source itself. We have a question. Yes?
And just to say, from COVID CP, anytime that we can combine data from any sources, would be open to figuring out how to do that, and whether we go through a neutral third program platform like Vivli to do that, or there are other methods would be happy to discuss. One of the challenges, of course, is finding, data and doing the post hoc data harmonization work. There is an effort at NIH, which is slightly different than clinical trial data, but it has to do with EHR, electronic health record data, that is doing some of that work in terms of data harmonization. I think it's one of the things that we could usefully do together, which is to develop, in addition to CDISC, some other data capture and standard outcome measures. If we actually look at all of the outcome measures for even the ordinal scales of COVID-19 response, they're all over the map, from 5 to 10 values with different days at endpoints of evaluation. So we've got work to do together to sort of figure out how to approach these trials so that they're interpretable and then analyzable. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Does Transcelerate accept eligible non-industry members from ex-US? And are there specific countries that wouldn't be allowed? How would you ensure compliance with the provisions of the DUA? Transcelerate, would you like to answer that? If you would accept eligible non-industry members from outside the US, and if there would be any specific countries that wouldn't be allowed?
Certainly for non-US, we are not just a US organization. So yes, we don't have any restrictions based on regions. And ensuring, compliance, that is all highly linked to our legal framework to support the data sharing. So again, if you meet the eligibility criteria going through the application process, there are many documents, including the data sharing agreement, that share the provisions that you need to comply with in terms of privacy and security.
Thank you. And then any plans to collaborate with the European Commission COVID data portal?
Is that one for Transcelerate?
I believe so.
Okay. So it's Janice. Why don't I take that one? So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that I think there was an earlier discussion, a question asking, are we open to accepting data, or are there discussions with governmental agencies as well? And without naming any specific ones, there certainly has been interest, right? I think Betsy talked about earlier that there's a real need for us to, as an ecosystem, to really kind of acknowledge this impetus for change in light of this pandemic. And I think there's just such a strong desire for everyone to kind of come together. And I think everybody on this webinar heard there's no fees I charge. Everybody's trying to kind of do the right thing and find ways to share data so that we can accelerate the science and development for vaccines and treatment as fast as we can for COVID-19. But I think, we have been approached by governmental agencies, and I know just looking at the attendees list, we have many participants, not just from biopharma companies, but also actually from industry groups such as FPI and CRO community that we work with. There's no current discussion, immediate discussions with that particular institution. That said, I think that in our ongoing discussions with different global entities, we have heard inquiries back from certain health authorities around Transcelerate. So I will leave it there. But again, this is just all brand new, but certainly we're not closing the door, right? I think that the discussions are starting to form.
Thank you, Janice. So a question is to help differentiate Vivli and Transcelerate in terms of who can request, what is shared, and the analytics. So I think I can go first, and then let the Transcelerate team go. So in terms of Vivli, who can request, really any qualified researcher that has a statistician on their team can make a request for the data and put in, as long as they have a scientific hypothesis of what is shared on the Vivli platform. We do provide a full analytics platform, which means that there is statistical software that is provided alongside with the data. Transcelerate, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this, and I think we've probably been through who can participate in response to a number of questions. So that's the same. And if you are eligible to participate in Datacelerate, then you're eligible to request. And then the difference again is we don't have analytics on our platform, but what we're able to do for our end users is to allow them to download all the data onto their own systems. So that can be individual studies, collection of studies, or just take a dump of the entire database at any time onto their own systems and interrogate there with a certain degree of freedom and an ability to integrate into their own data sets, create their own subject cohorts and everything. So it's sort of an unrestrained analytics, but it has to be provided by the end user.
Terrific. Okay. So another question is whether we at Vivli provide template protocols or case report form CRFs for harmonized data collection from contributors. We do not. I don't know if actually COVID-CP covers that territory. So I'll pass that to our COVID-CP colleagues.
Betsy, do you want to answer?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I thought I was unmuted.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat the question or point me to the question?
Do you provide any template protocols or case report forms for harmonized data collection?
So we are working on this. I think we're going to learn from the test cases that we're working on now, and hopefully be able to issue some concrete recommendations based on the lessons that we learn. Right now, we are linking to existing CRFs and recommendations for data collection, CDISC, ISARIC, but we're hoping to be able to provide something more streamlined and specific in the future. But I guess the answer would be no. At the moment, no, but we think this is a really important way that we can have an impact, and we hope to be able to do something on this front.
Great. Okay. I think there is another question that the data on Datacelerate is pseudonymized. How does this comply with GDPR, or is there patient consent to share that can be relied on? Datacelerate team?
Jules, I'll let you take the first stab at that one.
Thanks. Yeah, so it's up to the submitting company. Like we have regulations in the data sharing agreement which covers subject privacy. It's the responsibility of the contributing companies or members entities to ensure that they're complying with privacy regulations, including GDPR.
Okay, so one last question. One of the Datacelerate slides indicated data can be shared and downloaded for ongoing studies post-database lock. Unlike some of the other platforms where data is shared only after study has been completed, is this approach only limited to COVID trials and not other trials? Is that correct?
Yeah, I can take this one too. I mean, the provision exists for our other sharing side, where we share control arm data on any ongoing trial that's within our membership only. There's still a provision that studies can be shared. The requirement is post database lock. We don't really see sharing of ongoing trials on that side. We wanted to enable it with more focus for COVID-19, just because of the speed at which we have to work, in the speed at which research is being conducted. So it's going to be up to any contributing member company, right? It's always up to them as to what and when they share data. It has to be post a database lock, but we'll wait and see how quickly companies are prepared to share.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much, and really appreciate the wonderful questions, and everyone. The participation was really terrific. I've been asked to promote ISARIC for all their great work that has been in the field, which we really appreciate as well. And but I really want to thank the three our two presenting platforms that presented alongside me, COVID CP and Transcelerate. We look forward to a fruitful collaboration in the future as we go through this, and we will get through this. But thank you for all the questions, and we will make the slides available. I know that's something that we did get quite a few questions on, and hopefully we have answered all your questions. If we have not, please feel free to reach out to any one of the presenters that have given their contact information, and you can reach out directly to them. But thanks again for a really interactive time. We really enjoyed having you all here with us today. Thanks again, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.